Hey there, folks tuning into this corner of history's vast tapestry. Every day, I dig into the past, uncovering the raw, unfiltered truths about those who chased power and paid its price. If this dive into history rattles you, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Get ready because today's tale is a wild one. We're about to peel back the layers on one of history's most legendary queens. She was a figure of grandeur and timeless fame, but beneath the surface, her body bore the scars of disease, ravaged by the unstoppable march of time. What truths did she hide under thick makeup and soaring speeches? How far would a queen go to keep up the facade of perfection as her body betrayed her? Could a dazzling crown mask the pockmarks of smallpox? Or could her regal splendor cover a toothless smile in an old age she refused to let the world see? Picture a woman whose pride matched her brilliance, locked in a quiet war against her own decaying flesh. If this story of horror and a queen's physical decline grabs you like it does me, share in the comments where you're joining us from and which other historical figure you'd like me to drag out of the shadows. Your suggestions shape the stories I tell next. For a moment, shut your eyes and forget the image of a majestic queen. Instead, picture the dim glow of her private chambers, where candlelight hid sores and wigs covered baldness. Imagine the court's whispers, not of praise, but of hushed gossip about a monarch who danced 6 galliards despite a frail body, clinging desperately to youth as age consumed her. This is the tale, the tragedy, and the slow decline of Elizabeth I of England, the Virgin Queen, who fought time itself and lost. We're diving into the true story of Elizabeth Tutor, a queen eaten away by the years. Back in the 16th century, few things stirred up as much chaos as the birth of a single child, and Elizabeth Tutor's arrival was no exception. On September 7, 1533, sometime between 3 and 4 in the afternoon at Greenwich Palace, a girl who'd one day wear the crown came into the world. This was Elizabeth, born to King Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. But her birth crushed her parents' hopes. They'd prayed for a son to secure the Tudor line. Nearly every royal doctor and astrologer, except one, swore she'd be a boy, and the French king was even lined up to be godfather. The letdown was so heavy that the planned jousting tournaments were scrapped, and the letters announcing a prince were hastily tweaked, adding an S to make her a princess. From her earliest days, Elizabeth's childhood was a whirlwind of triumphs and turmoil, shaped by political upheaval and personal pain. In her first weeks, she was tended to in the royal nurseries by a wet nurse and her staff. By 3 months old, she had her own household, and on a chilly December afternoon in 1533, she was paraded through London streets, escorted by her great-uncle, the Duke of Norfolk. But her secure place in the world didn't last long. Just 2.5 years after her birth, Elizabeth's life changed forever when her mother fell from grace. After 2 miscarriages, Anne Boleyn lost Henry's favor. In January 1536, Anne miscarried again, and that same month, Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, passed away. With Catherine gone, Henry's Catholic critics saw him as a widower, free to remarry without the stain of bigamy. Henry, already smitten with Jane Seymour, turned on Anne Boleyn. She was arrested, charged with a slew of crimes: incest, plotting to kill the king, and beheaded on May 19, 1536. Elizabeth, not even 3 years old, was suddenly illegitimate, just like her half-sister, Mary. To most of Europe and England, Mary was the true heir. Many saw Elizabeth as nothing more than the king's bastard daughter, with ugly rumors swirling that Anne's infidelity meant Elizabeth wasn't even Henry's. Still, Henry always claimed her as his own and took pride in her sharp mind. The shock of her mother's execution and the uncertainty of her own status left deep scars on Elizabeth. Nobody knows who broke the news to her or how she processed it, but her household spiraled into chaos. Her half-sister Mary, stripped of her title as Princess of Wales, was sent to live with Elizabeth at Hatfield but refused to treat the toddler as a princess. Mary's bitterness and defiance disrupted Elizabeth's early years. It's said Anne Boleyn had ordered the household's ladies to slap Mary if she balked at caring for Elizabeth. Henry, in his ruthless push to secure Anne and Elizabeth's positions, had made Mary suffer in ways she'd never forgive, leaving Elizabeth to grapple with the messy reality of royal marriages. In 1543, Henry wed his sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr, who became a major influence on Elizabeth. Catherine leaned toward Protestantism, though she kept up appearances with Henry's Catholic faith, likely shaping Elizabeth's own beliefs. Under Catherine's care, Elizabeth flourished, getting an education as thorough as any prince's. By age 12, she was translating religious and classical texts, showing a real passion and talent for learning. Her mind was sharp, with no trace of what people back then called feminine weakness, and her grit rivaled any man's. But after Henry's death in 1547, the next decade became the most perilous of Elizabeth's life. She moved to Catherine Parr's household, now married to Thomas Seymour, a charming, ambitious man with terrible political judgment and brother to Lord Protector Somerset, uncle to young King Edward VI. Thomas Seymour started inappropriate games with the 14-year-old Elizabeth, showing up in her room in his nightshirt, tickling her, even slapping her buttocks. Elizabeth, with little experience around men, felt both flattered and scared by his attention. Catherine Parr, instead of stopping him, sometimes joined in, once even holding Elizabeth while Thomas cut her black dress to shreds. What we now recognize as sexual abuse caused a deep emotional crisis for Elizabeth, one some historians say haunted her for life. In 1548, Elizabeth was sent away from Catherine's household, supposedly for the Queen's health. They exchanged warm letters but never saw each other again. After Catherine Parr's tragic death in childbirth, Thomas Seymour, ever the ambitious schemer, set his sights on me again, plotting to make me his bride in a bold grab for power. The court, always alert to whispers of treachery, caught wind of his dangerous plans, and he was swiftly arrested for conspiracy against the crown. I faced grueling interrogations, but I kept my wits sharp and my composure steady, refusing to utter a single word that might condemn me or my allies. With fierce determination, I shielded my devoted servants from blame and staunchly proclaimed my innocence, showcasing a razor-sharp intellect and unyielding resolve that left my questioners grasping. The strain of this ordeal wore me down. My body grew gaunt, my head throbbed with relentless headaches, and my stomach churned with constant unease, a toll that lingered long after. Thomas Seymour met his end on the executioner's block in March 1549, a grim reminder of the stakes at play. Throughout my half-brother Edward VI's reign, I stayed vigilant and cunning, traits that kept me breathing in a court rife with danger. I chose simple black or white gowns, projecting an image of purity and humility, a stark contrast to my half-sister Mary, who reveled in her Catholic princess role, draping herself in the most lavish, eye-catching garments she could afford. When Edward passed in 1553, and John Dudley's desperate bid to place Lady Jane Grey on the throne collapsed, Mary, a fervent Catholic, claimed the crown, her faith and resolve reshaping England's future. The bond between Elizabeth and her half-sister Mary was always strained. Mary couldn't stand Elizabeth's sharp wit and her lack of fervor for Catholicism, and she held Anne Boleyn responsible for her own mother's tragic death and the loss of her father's love. Despite this deep-seated resentment, Mary, basking in her moment of victory, showed a willingness to mend fences. Elizabeth joined her side during Mary's triumphant procession into London. The two couldn't have looked more different. Mary, at 37, seemed older than her years, petite and frail like her mother, with a voice that carried a rough edge. Elizabeth, just 19, stood tall and lean, dressed in stark, simple gowns that made her stand out. But the political winds soon grew treacherous for Elizabeth. Mary's marriage to Philip II of Spain was wildly unpopular, and her harsh religious policies, bringing back heresy laws and burning nearly 300 Protestants, earned her the grim title of Bloody Mary. As the only real alternative to Mary's rule, Elizabeth was constantly under a cloud of suspicion. When Thomas Wyatt's rebellion erupted in January 1554, Elizabeth swore she had no part in it, but she was arrested and hauled to the Tower of London. The trip to the Tower broke her already fragile nerves. She pleaded to avoid entering through the Traitor's Gate, but her pleas were ignored. Stepping onto the landing, she proclaimed, "I stand here, a loyal subject, imprisoned, as true as any who've set foot on these steps." I have no friend but you, God, and I speak this truth before you alone. Her fear was raw and undeniable. She was taken to a small room in the bell tower, not as grim as she dreaded, but still a prison in the infamous Tower of London. Elizabeth endured 2 months there, each day filled with dread and the shadow of death. She was convinced she'd be poisoned, knowing Mary despised her and that many of Mary's advisors pushed for her execution. Lady Jane Grey, the fleeting 9-day queen, and her husband had already faced the executioner's axe in the grim Tower of London, and the crushing stress of my own imprisonment there wore me down. I shed weight, wrestled with pounding headaches, and endured relentless stomach pains. My salvation came with Philip II's arrival to marry my sister Mary, a twist of fate that spared my life. Philip, keenly aware of the political tightrope he walked, feared that my execution would sour his reception in England, already tense with distrust. Pressed by Philip's concerns and eager to please her new husband, Mary reluctantly set me free on May 19, 1554, granting me a reprieve I scarcely believed possible. Yet fear still clung to me like a shadow, and I spent that night in fervent prayer, convinced death was still lurking, ready to claim me. I was sent to Woodstock, a quiet hunting lodge, where I wasn't formally a prisoner but lived in a peculiar, uncertain state that left those around me puzzled, unsure of my place in the world. When I ascended the throne, I showed my mettle as a shrewd and pragmatic ruler, carefully crafting the image of the Virgin Queen, a brilliant strategy that defined my reign. This persona shielded me from the perils of a foreign marriage, like the one that had dragged Mary into unpopularity, and sidestepped the bitter rivalries that marrying an Englishman might ignite among my ambitious courtiers. I cultivated an aura of unshakable strength and stability, becoming Gloriana, a near-mythical figure my people revered, seemingly untouched by the frailties that plague mere mortals. But behind that polished facade was a body already worn by the traumas of her childhood and youth. On October 10, 1562, that illusion of invincibility shattered in the worst way. Feeling under the weather, Elizabeth, against the advice of her court, took a bath, something believed back then to weaken the body and invite disease. Within days, the awful truth hit. She'd caught smallpox, a brutal, disfiguring illness that often killed. The early signs were terrifying: fever, weakness, and loss of speech. To the court's horror, the telltale smallpox pustules hadn't even appeared yet, a sign her doctors took to mean death was certain. The palace fell into chaos, and the Privy Council scrambled, haunted by one question. If the Queen died, who would take the throne? Mary, Queen of Scots, was the clear heir by blood, but her Catholicism and French ties made her a nightmare for Elizabeth's Protestant advisors. Terror swept through the court, as everyone braced for the worst, fearing my death was imminent. In the midst of this chaos, a German physician, Dr. Burkitt, was summoned at the insistence of my cousin, Henry Carey, Lord Hunsdon, desperate to save me. Burkitt swaddled my unconscious form in red flannel and positioned me close to a roaring fire, hoping to stir life back into me. After 2 agonizing hours, I miraculously stirred, my eyes fluttering open, and words began to spill from my lips once more, a relief that rippled through the palace. My advisors, pale with worry, crowded around my bedside, pleading with me to name a successor to secure England's future. But to their astonishment, I flatly refused, instead demanding that Robert Dudley, my trusted friend, be appointed protector of the realm. Despite their fears that I wouldn't pull through, I began to mend, my strength slowly returning like a faint dawn. By October 25th, I was well enough to tackle matters of state again, though my face remained inflamed and scabbed, forcing me to stay hidden from public view, a shadow of my former self. Within a week, the smallpox's grip loosened, and, remarkably, my face bore no lasting scars. A stroke of fortune that felt like a gift from fate. Yet the disease carved deeper wounds in my mind and body, leaving me partially bald and reliant on wigs and layers of makeup to maintain my regal image. From that moment, my appearance became an all-consuming fixation, a battle to preserve the illusion of strength and beauty. I turned to thick, white lead and mercury-based cosmetics, widely used but dangerously toxic, to conceal blemishes and uneven skin, though over time, they ravaged my complexion further, eating away at what vitality remained. Already slender, I appeared even more fragile, my frame delicate beneath the heavy mask of artifice I wore daily. My love for sugary treats, paired with a dread of dental care, led to crippling tooth decay, so severe that foreign ambassadors struggled to decipher my words. R0TTED, a French diplomat, observed that my teeth were yellowed and uneven, sparser on the left side, and when I spoke quickly, my speech became a garbled mystery, a humbling reminder of my mortality. The rot in my teeth wasn't just a dental problem. It was a harsh, undeniable sign of my body's aging and the illnesses creeping in. A truth I couldn't fully mask despite all my efforts. As the years piled on, the gap between the dazzling, regal image I showed the world and the fragile reality of my weakening frame grew wider, a heavy burden that gnawed at my spirit day after day. My portraits, painted under my court's strict instructions, took on an almost sacred aura, depicting me as far younger than my true age, like timeless relics crafted to defy mortality itself. They cast me as Belle Phoebe or Astrea, graceful figures from myth, and after our glorious victory over the Spanish Armada, as Gloriana, the fairy queen who seemed forever young, radiating unshakable strength. This polished image wasn't mere vanity. It was a deliberate strategy, a vital shield of propaganda for a woman wielding power in a man's world, where my right to rule was endlessly challenged by doubters. But no matter how carefully I guarded that facade, the reality of my mortal, failing body kept breaking through, impossible to fully hide. As Walter Raleigh so poignantly put it, I was a queen whom time had overtaken unexpectedly. My once vibrant energy worn down by the unyielding march of years. In my last decade, hiding my physical decline became a losing battle, and a deep, unshakable sadness settled into my soul, dimming the fierce spirit that had once carried me through. In the fall of 1602, the deaths of those closest to me, especially Catherine Carey, Countess of Nottingham, my cherished niece and dearest companion for nearly 45 years, hit me like a thunderbolt, leaving my heart shattered and my resolve shaken. When Catherine passed in February 1603, my spirit shattered. The queen who cherished her so deeply sank into a profound depression that clung to me like a shadow I couldn't escape. Though I was frail, weighed down by sorrow, and nearing 70, my stubborn resolve and royal authority held firm. I refused to rest, standing defiantly in my chambers for hours, as if I could will time to slow its cruel march. When Robert Cecil, my loyal chief minister, pressed me to rest in bed, concerned for my fading strength, I lashed out. "A prince doesn't bend to the word must. You, little man, dare to order me about, thinking my end is near and my will is weak." Despite the heartfelt pleas from my attendants, who watched my decline with growing worry, I, an old queen worn by time, stood firm, perhaps dreading the specter of death or tormented by the sight of my once strong body now frail and failing. In those final, turbulent days, my mind felt like a storm, scattered with memories of past choices, weighed down by guilt and regrets over what I'd done or left undone. Elizabeth Southwell, one of my trusted ladies-in-waiting, whispered to the court that I was haunted by strange visions, and near the end, a grim discovery. A playing card stabbed with a nail sat on my chair, an eerie sign that chilled those around me. Overwhelmed by sorrow, I locked myself in my chambers, unable to face the world, my heart heavy with loss and isolation. William Camden, a chronicler who documented my reign, wrote of how my body and spirit crumbled as death drew near. My tonsils swelled painfully for a time before easing, but my hunger faded completely, and I stubbornly waved off the medicines my physicians begged me to take. I fell into a quiet, almost lifeless trance, refusing to eat or lie down, standing in my room for up to 15 hours, as if my defiance alone could hold back the inevitable tide of mortality. My failing health, mixed with a delirious and despairing mind, sped up my end. After relentless urging from Lord Admiral Charles Howard, I finally agreed to lie down in bed. Soon after, as I lay senseless, the elderly Archbishop Whitgift was called to pray at my bedside for my eternal soul. It's said that during this time, I asked for my coronation ring, symbolizing my marriage to England, worn since the day I was crowned, to be filed off my finger as the flesh had grown around it. This act, a grim sign of my approaching death, marked the end of my symbolic bond with the nation, like a contract finally dissolved. As death loomed, my ministers gathered around my bedside, desperate to know who I'd name as my successor. Unable to speak when asked if I wanted James VI of Scotland to take the crown, I weakly traced a circle around my head with my hands, signaling a crown and confirming my choice. I passed away on March 24, 1603 at Richmond Palace, sometime between 2 and 3 a.m. John Clapham, a chronicler, wrote that I left this world gently, like a lamb, or as easily as a ripe apple falls from a tree. But my death was shrouded in dark rumors, fueled by tales of my decaying body. Some whispered I died of blood poisoning from the toxic lead-based makeup I used, which could kill if slathered on too long. Others guessed cancer, possibly developing in my final year, or maybe a simple bronchial infection that turned into pneumonia, given my old age and weakened state. My doctors couldn't pin down a cause since I refused examinations, and no autopsy was done. Still, my deep depression and melancholy, which left me isolated, surely hastened my end. Even after death, my body sparked grim fascination. Elizabeth Southwell, one of my ladies, claimed my corpse was so filled with noxious gases that it burst open in its coffin, with a loud crack as the body and head split. Horrifying, though her account's reliability is shaky since she later turned Catholic. On April 28, just over a month after my death, my body was carried in a grand procession through King Street to Westminster Abbey for burial. Chronicler John Stowe wrote that Westminster streets, houses, windows, and gutters overflowed with crowds who came to see my funeral. When they saw my effigy on the coffin, the air filled with such sighing, groaning, and weeping as no one had ever witnessed before. My body was first placed in the vault of my grandparents, Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. In 1607, my coffin was moved to share a tomb with my half-sister, Mary. The Latin inscription on our tomb reads, "Partners in throne and grave, here we rest, Elizabeth and Mary, sisters, hoping for resurrection." It's a bitter irony that death united two women divided by life, faith, and politics. In the 1880s, Arthur Stanley, with Queen Victoria's permission, inspected my tomb and found the wood at the head of my coffin had collapsed, with parts of the decayed lid crumbling away, revealing the stark reality of rot. My reign as Elizabeth I was later celebrated, especially in the 17th century, as a golden age. Gloriana, the Protestant heroine who vanquished the Spanish Armada and lifted England to its peak. But modern historians see me more clearly. Brilliant and cunning, yes, but cautious in foreign policy, with my harsh military moves in Ireland staining my legacy. From my mother's execution, I lived under the shadow of death and questions of legitimacy. My body, despite all my efforts to project youth and strength, was mortal, scarred by smallpox, toothless, bald, and haunted by the delusions of old age, all part of a quiet war fought beneath my royal armor. My obsession with my image wasn't just vanity. It was propaganda, a way to project power in a world skeptical of a woman's rule. My story, Elizabeth Tutor's, is a stark reminder that no amount of power or intellect can stop the slow, cruel decay of the flesh. The Virgin Queen, Gloriana, was, in the end, a woman consumed by illness and loneliness, a body that battled until its final breath against the inevitable. In my tomb, beside my sister, lies the echo of a life that, despite all my efforts to hide it, bore the raw marks of my personal struggle.